跟大家分享的主题，来跟大家谈科技领航视野，预见不一样的农业新未来。那么这个场次呢，会由 Dr. Willem Jan Knibbe 来跟大家做预录的演讲哦。那么 Dr. Willem Jan Knibbe 他其实是阿姆斯特丹自由大学的物理以及天文学系的博士。那么他也在数据密集型的环境当中从事科学研究还有应用方面的工作相当的多年。那么我们接下来就带大家一起来聆听科技领航视野预见不一样的农业新未来的这一场演讲。
Welcome to this presentation. It's a great honor for me to join you and give you this presentation. So thank you very much for the invitation. I will be presenting material from Wageningen University and research. It's not only my own material, there are many colleagues have been working for this, and it's also a pleasure for them to be able to share these ideas and thoughts and results with you. I also included some material from colleagues from outside our university. First, let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Willem Jan Knibbe. I'm the director of the Wageningen Data Competence Center. And the Wageningen Data Competence Center started now about 5 years ago, since Wageningen University and Research recognizes the opportunities and challenges given by data science and artificial intelligence, especially for the domain that Wageningen is researching, so the domain of agriculture, food, environment, economics, social sciences, animal and plant sciences. These are traditionally largely investigated, for instance, by modeling and simulation, but also by experiments. And the Wageningen Data Competence Center was started to further explore and enable the opportunities of data science, data management, and artificial intelligence. So I've been a director now for about 5 years, and this presentation will share some experiences, ideas, and also hopefully offer interesting perspectives for you for discussion. Unfortunately, of course, due to distances in space and time, this is a recorded presentation. Feel free to reach out and contact me afterwards. I will be happy to answer questions, and maybe we meet sometime. I hope you enjoy the conference. So that is about the introduction. Now we go to the first slide of the presentation, where we will be focusing first on research. Actually, the presentation is composed of 2 parts. The first part is about perspectives and experiences in research, and the second part will focus more on technology. Before we turn to the first part of research, let me show a few examples. What is technology about in agriculture? Now, technology is nowadays you may say, defining agriculture. It has been a long time since human labor was sufficient to grow crops, to sow crops, to weed and to harvest. Here you see large machines as used in our country, but also I think in your place, where we can much more efficiently deal with the efforts needed for agriculture. And the first one was actually already as a kind of automation in how to deal with plants. Here you see another example where also the harvesting can be done automatically, which of course requires a lot of precision and development before it's possible to harvest peppers like these. Such developments of increasingly autonomous technology and automation and even self-control of equipment leads to entirely new processes in agriculture. And I hope in this presentation to share some perspectives in this. Another example is that after growing and sowing and harvesting, even further in the chain of food production, so when we are talking about the distribution of food, in this case the tomatoes, you see no humans anymore in this example, which defines that the possibilities given by digitalization, communication technology, and machine intelligence has huge implications for the future labor and labor force related to agriculture, and also, of course, to market opportunities. This area is very actively researched worldwide, also in our institute, and I hope to share in the following some interesting ideas. Actually, this was a study done for the European Union to assess the state of the art, which evidently is changing quickly. So there is also a relation between technology and research, of course. What you see here on the left is, you may say, the traditional way, at least the traditional way we know of doing research in agriculture, where you try different varieties under different circumstances, in a different climate, with a different operational regime and a different soil, and then you see which one grows or which one doesn't grow. And you need quite a lot of experiments to find out the optimal combination of soil conditions, humidity, climate, and genetic varieties to get an optimal harvest under such conditions. But it's very reliable and you know what you're doing. And in some way, it provides a lot of expertise to the researchers. If they do so, they learn exactly what plant works under what conditions. To the right in this image is an entirely different approach, now becoming possible. It's not yet mainstream because there are a lot of challenges related to this approach. But to the right, you see that it's in principle possible not to do the experiment yourself, but just to collect data from existing crops, which grow in different climates, on a different soil, with a different operational regime, and where different varieties, in this case of corn, have been planted. And if you are able to collect these data from worldwide differing locations, it's in principle possible to replace the experiments by actual operational conditions, which of course is very interesting because an experiment usually is done on a small scale, and here you can collect data from entire fields of huge areas, and you can collect data from many more different varieties and operational conditions than you could in case of experiments. Then you need to add, of course, also weather data. And if you do this in a sufficiently clever way, it's in principle possible to replace or even supersede the traditional way of doing research by data science, which provides a lot of opportunities on finding optimal varieties. But it's not only a sunny side here, because it's quite complicated operationally to collect the right data, to be sure about their accuracy, to get consent of farmers to use the data, and to be sure that you have the right units, completeness, and coverage of the area. So it's a kind of perspective, how research changes, but there is still a lot to be done before this perspective can be exploited fully. So this is about plant science. Now we turn to animal science, where of course it's very important to monitor how animal health develops. And here traditional observational studies can be more and more superseded by video monitoring, where sensor and automation can see how animals move. You can derive patterns of healthy animals, compare those with patterns from animals from which you know that they are not so healthy. And if you do this often enough, you can actually recognize automatically which animals are in risk. And this is also requiring a kind of data infrastructure, of course, but the different one from the ones I mentioned before. But if you have the right type of data infrastructure, you can relieve farmers from a lot of the burden of monitoring animals, which is, of course, very important in case the farm size grows. If you have 10 or 40 cows, it's not such a problem to get an eye on them. But if you supersede to hundreds of cows, this becomes very challenging. So it's practical for the farmer, but it's also good for animal health if you can automatically monitor their health. These are examples from colleagues, by the way. I sometimes put names behind the pictures. Those are the colleagues that have been working on it. I don't want to give the impression that it's all my work, but please feel free to ask afterwards if you want to know more, and I can also forward you to the expertise of the colleagues who have been working on areas like these. So these are a few perspectives of technology influencing research in animal and plant sciences. Here I offer you another perspective. It's from a totally different area from usually investigated in Wageningen University and research. It's from microeconomics. In particular, it's about analyzing business processes. It's from a Dutch researcher, a Professor Wil van der Aalst, now working in Germany. And in business optimization, it has long been the custom to develop a kind of model how approximately a business operates. So a model of what a secretary does, what a director does, what a production process does, how invoicing works, and then with this model to derive a kind of optimal distribution of work, and to derive how many directors you would need, how many secretaries you would need, and how many people you would need to do the invoicing and production, etc. Now, the hypothesis of this Wil van der Aalst is that this is not a very practical way to work, because each model fails because you make the wrong assumptions or you use the wrong parameters. And his thesis is that you should actually just harvest the data that you have. And here is a picture of a schematic picture of what information systems in a company could look like, and just harvest what activity is being done to use the timestamps of each activity. And then with the fancy orange figure denoted process mining, then infer somehow what is going on in the business. And then you can be very accurate about exactly what a director does, how many secretaries are working efficiently and how many not. So with the computer and data, you can actually derive business processes rather than make assumptions and estimate parameters. Of course, this requires a sufficient amount of data, but with reality seen as a kind of mystery, the data providing snapshots, interpreting these snapshots by providing the right data management and metadata and applying data scientific methods, you can actually interpret these snapshots into what is going on in a company. And this is a wonderful analogy, I think, to what we could do in nature, where nature is the mystery. Of course, we don't have nicely timestamp data. We have very much unstructured data like images or collections of recordings or whatever. But in principle, we can just as well as in this example, organize meaningful data infrastructures, as I depicted below this figure. And then with hybrid AI, where we combine expertise-based modeling with data-driven algorithms, visual analytics to actually derive behavior from animals or plants, for instance. Like I showed before, you can derive animal behavior from images. Complex systems analysis and learning, you can at least aim to explain nature with AI, which is quite a different approach from experimental data and simulation modeling, because here you actually use the data as a kind of source of knowledge, and you use computer algorithms to derive the knowledge that you actually want to use. Here I show the name. It is Wil van der Aalst who developed this kind of paradigm. So I think that continuing along the lines I showed for plant science and animal science, we can study nature using computer science. And this is becoming more and more customary if you follow literature. And this is also one of the aims that we have in Wageningen, to work on observations of nature, to develop data infrastructures using all the information contained in unstructured data. And so to derive with artificial intelligence the behavior of plants, the influence of genes on plants, the different factors influencing growth and production and behavior of plants and animals, and then with hybrid AI to develop models to play, so to speak, with the knowledge that we have and investigate scenarios of how nature would behave. And so going from the left, where we observe nature, to the right, to build installations that actually help us in a sustainable way to improve the production systems that we have and need as humans to survive. So this is a further perspective. And you may wonder, how has this become possible? Because it's not that as humans, suddenly we have become much more clever, but apparently something has happened that makes it possible to at least generate these perspectives and also do the research to use computing intelligence to help human intelligence to get a better understanding of the behavior of nature and to play with that. With the following slides, I'd like to show you some developments that you may well be aware of, but that together are very interesting to combine because I think they explain why we now have these possibilities. This is the first development I wanted to share with you. We can now measure anything anywhere almost. We can develop sensors, field sensors, measuring temperature, but also moisture, the content of minerals in the soil. We can develop cameras actually monitoring growth of plants. We can do so in a laboratory, but we can also do so in the field. We can attach sensors to our animals to detect their moving patterns. We can use cameras or drones to count the animals, where they go, how much they eat, and we can even use sensors to automatically monitor the conditions of storage of food quality. And with network technology, we can transmit all these data to central places for processing. So sensor technology is one of the developments, and the reduction in size and efficiency and the reduction in need of energy is a very important factor, I think, that provides one of the bases we need for the perspective I just shared. Another interesting development is, of course, just the cost, because all these data collected with sensoring information needs to be stored somewhere. And with increasing amounts of data, you need, of course, increasing amounts of storage. And the interesting thing I show here is that in a period of 35 years, from 1980 to 2015, the cost per unit of storage has decreased by a factor of 10 to the 7th. And to the 10 to the 7th is just a number, but if you would imagine what would have happened to the prices of real estate if they would have been reduced by a factor of 10 to the 7th, it's just unimaginable how much this is. So this shows that the technology of data storage is an enormous development. You see a bit of leveling off starting at about 2017 to 2015, but apparently new technologies will be developed, so it's expected to become even more cheaper than it is now. So apart from censoring, the reduction in cost of storage is important and impressive, as is, of course, as you well know, the increase in computing speed. Here you see in a period of 45 years, the number of transistors on integrated circuits as just one of the indicators that can be used to see how much computing speed has increased. If you collect the data with the increasing amount of sensors and you store the data on cheaper hard disk, you also want to do something with it. And you need, of course, an increase in computing speed. And here again, you see a 10 to the 7th times increasement. And if you, for instance, would compare that to what would happen to cars if they would be driving 10 to the 7th times faster, it's an unimaginable increase what's happening. Now, this provides the opportunity for computer scientists to develop ever smarter algorithms. Here you see a few examples of one of the promising developments in machine learning, where you can distinguish between unsupervised learning and let the computer determine patterns and help you in understanding the data that you have, or supervised learning, where you actually impose part of your knowledge to the data, which is much more labor intensive, but also sometimes more efficient. And the applications shown here are, for instance, in genetics, functional annotation of metagenomes, in astronomy, X-rays, cosmology, galaxies, or also in physics, I think, and neuroscience and particle physics are shown, climate science. The interesting thing is that such developments tend to start in these already rather computational domains like physics, astronomy, genetics. But apparently, I think there's a whole world to be won when we would more and more apply methods like these to plant science, animal science, environmental science, where also, of course, many models are being used, but they are less advanced so far compared to, for instance, physics, I think. So a lot of developments can be done using these technological developments in the areas of agri-food where we work in. A lot is happening, of course, also, but I think still a lot more opportunity exists here. And then, of course, you want to share the data, you want to share the results, and you want to be able to communicate with the research that you do. And here you see another interesting development, also well known, of course, where you see, again, a rise of 10 to the 7 times when you would count internet users by world region. So we can measure anything, we can store anything ever cheaper, we can calculate whatever we want ever quicker, and we can reach out to each other in an increasing way. So these developments together, I think, can explain how much more we are now able to do in science. And that also poses a challenge because now we need to find out how to do that. Well, in Wageningen, that is one of our major opportunities and also challenges. And I want to tell you something about how we approach this particular problem. I hope for your inspiration and maybe also afterwards for comments and suggestions to us to get also new ideas from you, maybe. This is a kind of overview that was composed from all different kinds of research happening in our institutes and with our partners. It was made by Ricardo Torres. Ricardo Torres with Anna Fensel and Johannes Athanasiadis have been appointed recently, all 3 of them as professors in data science and AI, with the possibility to connect to the various domains that we have in plant science, animal science, food science, and environmental science and social sciences. And this is a kind of image we constructed together. It was mainly proposed by Ricardo on how this would look like if we would like to combine all the developments I just showed to you. So at the bottom, you see, of course, the physical world with cities and agriculture and food and environment. And we want to be able to use digital technology, as you see in the upper right, to visualize developments, to interact with citizens, politicians, and planners and other stakeholders, and to be able to use our scientific information to help the further development of society. So somehow we need to visualize and interact with these people. What we visualize and interact is shown on the upper left. So we can, of course, develop simulation-based services on how plants grow, how a farm can be operationalized, how food production could be improved. And these services or models use, of course, data-driven services to recommend, to predict, and to search, and to do quality control. A very important part shown on the lower left is the data management, because as I mentioned before, we have great ambitions, we have wonderful ideas and are able to sketch perspectives, but a very large challenge for us, but not only for us, also for our partners and for society, is how to do the fair data management. With fair, we mean findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data management. And not all data is findable to start with. And if we have found it, it's not always accessible. And when it's accessible, it's not only easily usable by machines. So the interpretation is sometimes requiring a lot of effort. And when we once have done so, we want to turn back. So it also needs to be reusable, but then we also need to be sure about the continuity of data management. So the fair data management part is a very important part in how to make data understandable, reliable, and available. And it's absolutely crucial to be able to develop the services and to be able to do the interaction. So with this image, we provide a kind of overview. And for instance, we have programs running on digital twins, where we develop digital twins of food intake, how responds people to what they eat, and how can we actually in real time follow their response in order to be able to advise them what would be healthy to eat. Or a digital twin of a farm, where we see how can we monitor the nitrogen exhaust of farms and modify processes in farming to reduce the nitrogen exhaust, or a digital twin of a greenhouse, a tomato greenhouse, where we want to follow in real time the climate in the greenhouse and see what operational conditions would improve the growth and quality of, in this case, tomatoes, and how we can reduce energy consumption, which is currently, of course, a major concern also in the Netherlands, where gas prices are really soaring. So based on this picture, we try to pinpoint relevant developments. We do programs with partners and find out what kind of digital technology actually is useful in the domain of agriculture and food sciences. Now a final example of science. It's about plant growth models. And plant growth models is, of course, a kind of fundamental in our area, because if you can model how a plant grows, what factors influence growth, the speed and the quality, you can do, in principle, many other things. It's a kind of particle physics for biology. If you know how a plant grows, you can do a lot more. Well, this is, of course, a highly expertise area for biologists, where you can use any expertise you have in how the function of plant depends on its characteristics, how the genes determine their growth, and also how the environment influences the growth. Well, this is from a paper from another organization, where they actually depict how, in principle, it should be possible to build plant growth models from computer images. So you take pictures of a plant that's happening above in this illustration. Then you create a kind of skeleton of what are the stems, what are the leaves. So you have a kind of graph of how the plant is constructed. Then you label these. This is a leaf. This is a stem. And then by taking more and more pictures, you can actually follow the growth of each plant element by carefully analyzing the video images. And then you can do so, of course, under many different circumstances. You can add data on climate, on temperature, on humidity, on fertilizers that you add. And in this way, you can, in principle, train a model exactly replicating how a plant grows. So very much simplified, of course. On the left, you add imaging data to this highly complex system. And on the right, you get a kind of plant growth model. Well, of course, this is, as we say in Dutch, toekomstmuziek, so music of the future. It's very hard to do so, because all the challenges you can imagine you will meet here, like the accessibility of data, like the explainability of AI algorithms, like the mistakes you have once you supersede the domain, you have data. But in principle, it's a very interesting and challenging opportunity that you could develop plant growth models automatically from images. So now let's turn to technology for the last part of this presentation. I want to highlight a few examples before closing this presentation, just to give you an impression of what possible perspectives we see. It would be interesting to also hear your comments and suggestions on the perspectives that you see from your point of view. One of the major things that we see is the development of biotechnology. Of course, we have a lot of challenges in what kind of plants we need under the different circumstances, and also changing circumstances, for instance, due to climate change, where in the Netherlands we, for instance, see salt intrusion, which really changes the soil where we want to grow our crops. But another thing is that apart from food, we also need many materials for living that for a large part are now generated based on carbon-based technology. And here you see a few areas where biotechnology is important, like pharmaceutical materials, energy, human well-being, and food ingredients, of course. And there is a very active and ambitious research area in how we can use systems and synthetic biology, for instance, focusing on individual enzyme behavior to facilitate the production of the materials that we need. Well, this has been, of course, traditionally been for a large part biology, but what we see now, by the way, this is by the IBISPA consortium, I think a European large consortium focusing on biotechnology. We see in a recent overview that in biotechnology also digital technology is more and more increasing as an important part of biotechnology. Here you see the major trends in innovation in biotechnology as recognized this year in 2022. And at the top you see artificial intelligence and big data, followed by gene editing and precision medicine. So for instance, in principle, where you should first collect and select by hand which genes you would like to analyze, in principle it's imaginable to use artificial intelligence and robotics to automatically analyze a whole collection of genes and see how they operate and what effects they would have. So for instance, in biotechnology, we see a kind of marriage coming forward of digital technology with biotechnology. And so far, I think we cannot oversee the consequences of that and how much more efficient biotechnology could operate if indeed digital technology would be fully operationalized here. So that's one of the trends. The other trend is, of course, already mentioned at the start of the presentation, I think the influence of labor in agriculture. What you see here is the cost of labor as a percentage of total earnings for various crops. To the left, you see potatoes, and to the right, you see flower bulbs. And in the middle, you see, for instance, pigs and trees. And what you see over time is a gradual, not in all sectors the same, increase of the cost of labor, ranging from about 6% to almost 30% over the various years. Well, this is becoming more and more challenging because with an aging population, there is less labor available. And with the developing economics in other countries, not everybody wants to do our agriculture in the Netherlands, and I think this will happen in more places. So there is a huge opportunity to find alternative ways to reduce the cost of labor and also the part of labor. This is from a study 2 years ago from a large bank focusing on the potential of robotics in agriculture. And here you see actual numbers for instance, sowing robots or inspection robots or harvesting robots, and the actual sales are, you may say, pretty low. So there are 50 sowing robots sold a year, or 100 inspection robots, for instance. And to the right, you see the higher numbers for weed control, drones, and autonomous vehicles. And you also see in this picture the stage, so from university used to multinationals, and to the left is the more experimental stage, and to the right you see the multinational operational stages. But the market potential of these developments is huge. It's really in billions, of course, because the reduction in labor cost would be enormous if these robots could be used more and more. So apart from biotechnology, we see also a lot of developments, for instance, in robotics, influencing agriculture internationally. Well, here you see a few examples of what we research in, hands-free farming by picking peppers, sensing, plant-animal phenotyping to non-destructively determine the quality of products to be delivered to consumers. If you want to minimize inputs, for instance, fertilizer, chemicals, the energy footprint, it's highly efficient to use automated machines of a type I've shown before. And intelligent sensors become more and more important for providing insight in food quality. Of course, all this knowledge needs also to be made available to society. And here you see one of the projects we have been working on in the European context, where we actually do use cases together with farmers and companies to find out how to deploy these technology. This is from a large European project called Internet of Food and Farm, where from the design, implementation to evaluation and testing and demonstration, we go from small to large scale implementations all over Europe of the technologies I just showed you. Given time, I think I need to go towards the end. I will share the last few slides and then leave the videos maybe better for later. This is one example also to make technology available, where we share data with farmers on actual field plots and allow them to insert their data to get actual advice on how to do their management. And as shown here, also actual weather conditions are available. So the farmer doesn't need to rely on his own expertise alone. He can actually use automated support, which is very important in digital technology to make it easily accessible to the farmers, for instance. And one of the last developments I'd like to share with you, that you can imagine there is coming into existence a kind of smart cycle of planning and control, using all the data that we have, using the data the farmer has themselves. And then it's much easier to develop how you should use your farm with all the data. It's also, in principle, possible to use the data to determine food integrity for consumers, corporate decision makers on how to deliver goods to farmers. So science and technology is also in some way connecting the different sectors. It can also be used for governments to facilitate public decision makers. And one of the last things I would like to mention is that if you imagine drones flying by, you wouldn't really have to wait for crops to be delivered to the supermarket before you can buy them. In principle, via the internet, you could access actual farmers and asking them for smart delivery by drones. And I think in Asia, these developments may be much further already than they are in Europe. So one of the last perspectives I would like to share with you is that the entire chain of food production and consumption under the influence of digital technology, in this case robotics, but also smart delivery, could really change significantly the last years. So I think the horizon is approaching quickly to us. As Wageningen, we are very much interested in to contribute to these developments and also to work together with it. This is a picture showing some interesting examples of how to use farming data, how to use texting cows to follow their conditions, smart tractors, but of course many more can be thought of. And I think I'd like to close the presentation here. As I mentioned, the horizon is approaching quickly. For any questions, please let me know. I have made some slides available, also including videos that you maybe can play later when this material has been shared. So thank you for your attention.